I would like to invite now Dr. Efrat Oron, the head of research and outreach in the Manna Center for being the moderator of our next session. Please, Efrat.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nir. Thank you, Elliot, for this inspiring talk. And I don't know about you, but I'm really excited about our agenda today. I think we're going to achieve great things here, and I'm really looking forward to hear all our talks today. So, our first session is titled Food and Nutritional Security, and our first speaker today is Professor Jonathan Gressel. He's with the Weizmann Institute. He's the recipient of the 2010 very prestigious Israel Prize, and I would like to welcome him. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very surprised that neither of the speakers before me quoted the Talmud and said, Im ein kemach ein Torah, im ein Torah ein kemach. If there is no learning, there's no food. If there's no food, there's no learning. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Let's see if it works this way. How nutritious is the food we eat? Well, if you look at the label, maybe you're better off eating the box on the cornflakes. And it's even getting worse because the recent demands of non-GMO corn in the cornflakes, if you now read the label, they've taken out the vitamins as well, some of the vitamins, and that's because they were made by genetic engineering. So that's almost as bad as taking out the vitamins from the infant formula here because it wasn't kosher. We have to be very careful in how we consider our food supply. Now, what do people really like? They don't like it when it's loaded with additives banned by the FDA. The witches might. And let's see which one. Plants don't like to be eaten. They produce toxins, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Domestication has included the selection for toxin-free plants, or we think they are, to most people, but not to all. 80%, and we also have to remember that 80% of our calories for us and our farm animals come from 4 species, which is a very important food security issue. One major plague of any given crop, and we are very food insecure. And even these crop contains allergens. 2.5% of adults have food allergies. There are 30,000 emergency hospital visits each year in the United States. 175 people in America die every year from food allergies. Breeding has not done everything to get the allergens out of food. It can't. So we have some real problems. So what is more naturally good? Foods with or without allergens and toxins, with or without essential amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. We have to enrich our food with the good things and get the bad things out. And of course, the way to do this quickly nowadays, to introduce new traits like better nutrition or to remove anti-nutritious factors, is by genetic engineering. And that includes both transgenics and genome editing, 2 different ways of doing things we can do nowadays. This is just to show you how many allergens in our major crops: soybean, wheat, barley, etc., rice. Make an impression. There are lots of things on the slide. We can't see them. But all we have to do is look at the skin, chas v'chalila, of a pig, which is typically used for allergen testing, and we see, if you take soybean, there are huge spots of reactivity. There are a lot of allergens in soybean, which is a major crop. We get a lot of things. 1/3 of children under 3 are allergic to soybean products. They can't use inexpensive formula. Now, that might not be a problem here, but it is a problem in the developing world when you can't use soybean milk. It means a poor mother, if she doesn't have her own milk, cannot afford other than soybean milk, and for kids allergic, it's dead. 75% of the antibodies from allergenic children interacts with a single protein, a cysteine protease, in a major storage protein found in soybeans. It can be removed. These are just some of those who like science to see that. It forms into big bodies in the soybean seeds, and you can see the immunogold labeling from sensitive humans. Elliot Herman and his group used a gene deletion technology, RNAi, to remove it, and you can see the column number 3 in those gels. No more allergen. It can be done by genetic engineering, done quickly. Hasn't been released because of public distaste for genetic engineering. By the way, the same allergen fish, carnivorous fish, are allergic to the same thing. Therefore, fish cannot get too much soybean meal in their diet. They have to have other fish in their diet, which is exceedingly wasteful. So maybe someday the label of Similac will say contains only transgenic, non-allergenic soybean milk. It contains no native allergenic soybeans, good for infants of all ages. And even better, when they add genes to the soybeans, and you can have balanced omega-3 fatty acids transgenically added to the soybean to match mother's milk. This would be much better for those children who can't be nursed. Same thing with pigs, carnivorous fish. They're allergic to the same allergens. Rice also has allergens. Major crop in the Far East. It's what a lot of people eat. It's the major food crop in the world, has allergens. There are allergens all over the place. They can be removed by the same stories. Another issue that's in the food supply, especially in the tropical developing countries, is mycotoxins. The warmer, more humid the climate, the poorer storage conditions, the better it is for the fungi that make the mycotoxins. And 70% of deaths among children under 5 in the developing world come from biologically contaminated food, and mycotoxins are the major contaminant. So we have aflatoxins produced by some species of Aspergillus and Fusarium. Low levels affect the liver, where the efficiency of food utilization is reduced. And that can result, is one of the causes of kwashiorkor, according to the literature. At higher levels, it does immunosuppression, disease susceptibility, hepatitis, high levels, liver death, and cancer. I was just in Kenya last week visiting some farms, and one farm had spread out corn, which was more flour than corn. It was so eaten that the beetles were no longer in it, and it must have been totally full of aflatoxin. And they were wondering what should they do with this corn, the farmers. And the typical thing is, oh, we can't eat it, so we'll make beer out of it. And the problem is the aflatoxin goes to the beer, and then you hear about stories of a whole village dying at a party because they drank locally brewed beer, which is full of such things. So kwashiorkor is due to malnutrition, not undernutrition in many cases. If you're getting food full of aflatoxins, low levels of aflatoxin, your liver can't metabolize the food. And this has been verified in some studies. The greater the malnutrition, the more the body aflatoxin found in the bloodstream. Oopsie, wrong way. Okay. It's rare, but sometimes people actually make economic calculations of how bad these things are. And an Australian group just studied the aflatoxin levels in food in some countries in Southeast Asia and calculated what it actually costs. Because if you take this material and you feed it not to yourselves, but feed it to cattle or pigs or chickens, it also affects their livers and has the same effect. Fumanicins are another typical thing in the foods. In babies, in pregnant women, it results in children with neural tube defects, which mean the babies die. With adults, it causes esophageal cancer. It's caused by fusarium infection of the grain, and it's insect vectored. And one of the surprising things that people weren't expecting when they came out with transgenic maize that was insect resistant, all of a sudden, much lower levels of fumanicins. Because this is, and then they realized that the fungus is vectored by the insects, and if you don't have insects, you can't vector it. So there's another case where genetic engineering has been very helpful, not doing everything it could be doing. So these fungi are systemic and they can be removed. So there have to be more biotech ways to deal with these mycotoxins in the developing world. And in the first world, it doesn't really matter. The grain is gas dried, harvested, stored in wonderful silos. In Africa, it's stored under the eaves of a leaking roof in a gunny sack, and very easy for fungi to infect the grains. Fungicides are used in the developed world to control the infections of the grain. They're used only in export crops in Africa. They can't afford to use them with their own local crops. And actually last week I saw, actually 4 days ago, I saw experiments with using a transgenic aspergillus from the United States, which is doesn't make mycotoxins, and they're developing it for release in Kenya to swamp out the native fungus. So there are various ways of doing this, and we have to think of them more and more of using various aspects of genetic engineering to remove them. The best thing is to put in genes that actually break down things like aflatoxin. The only genes that I've seen so far have actually come from resistant human beings, the cytochrome P450. There's some papers on it. It's going to be a question whether you can put human genes, what people will say about putting human genes into crops, but if it actually degrades the aflatoxin, it's almost pikuach nefesh. So we try to have to exclude the vectors. We have to use everything we can to prevent this from happening. I'm not going to go through this all. In any talk like this, people will spend a lot of time on golden rice, so I won't. But this is rice that heavily enriched, the second generation is heavily enriched with carotenoids, which will prevent blindness in the third world. We have to remember that a child who is blind will not be able to work and will not make it to maturity. So this should have been out years ago. It isn't. It's had all sorts of regulatory problems which make no sense because it's keratin. Keratin is keratin, no matter how you make it. And the fact that you can do it in the major crop in the Far East, where they don't grow much else, is very important. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Another issue is minerals in food. A lot of the grains we eat, have phytic acid in them. And that sequesters phosphorus. It's because it contains phosphorus, but it also sequesters zinc and iron. So non-ruminant animals, in other words us, who eat these grains don't get the iron, the zinc, and the phosphorus that are in these grains. And people have been working in different ways of reducing the phytic acid, the storage in the grains, so that we won't have this problem. And Major crops produce just, this is U.S. data, I guess 50 million tons phytate per year. It binds 9 million tons of phosphorus, which is not available to animals. So not only is it not available, but they feed the animals superphosphate to make up for the phosphate they don't get, and then the phytate is excreted, the soil bacteria and excreta end up in water, and you end up with major environmental contaminations once the phytate is broken down in nature. So there are two problems. So you can add the enzyme phytase to feed, which is a requirement in some countries. It should be here. I don't think it is. We can lower the phytate by breeding or by transgenics. The Chinese are already beginning to market maize that does not, that has phytase in the grain. Actually, so it degrades it when the animal eats the grain. Okay, so there are various advantages to do this. The enzymes, phytase is available from many different sources with many different properties. You can choose the gene you want to do this. And when you do this, you can see that you very much increase the availability of phosphorus as well as zinc and iron. So, I won't go through how it does it, but you can see the iron availability is very much increased when you do this. Now I'm going to talk about a biofuel crop, which doesn't seem that it should make sense for food security. But this is jatropha. They talk about growing it for biodiesel. And they say it's great because you can grow it on non-agricultural lands. But the seeds are 30% oil, and they contain some real dangerous compounds. They contain quercetin, which is very similar to ricin, which is one of the most toxic compounds in nature. It's only about half as toxic as ricin. It also contains some esters which can cause skin tumors. The problem is, what do you do with this protein? They're going to take the oil out. What do you do with the protein residue when it contains something like this quercetin, which is toxic? Now, why am I bringing this up? Because it could be used as animal feed if it wasn't toxic. If you had a non-toxic protein, you'd get the oil out for your biodiesel, and you'd now have a protein which you can deal with. Interestingly enough, there's no regulatory requirements. They talk about taking this toxic residue and putting it on the soil. Nobody asks what it's doing to soil organism. Same thing with castor beans. They're talking about growing it. It has ricin. I made the calculation that if you fill a car with 50 liters of diesel, there'll be enough ricin byproduct in the protein to kill 3 people at the lowest content, 45 people. So actually there's a biosecurity as well as biosafety question there of growing such a crop for biofuels. But these are non-transgenic, so nobody asks about environmental impact study, no regulatory scrutiny. Now, the genes that produce these are by gene editing, you can do this. Of course, there's a lot of hype for these toxic oil seeds. You tell them, the marketing expert, that they're toxic, that they're all the parts are known carcinogens, and the PR expert says make you appreciate life. So there's a lot of PR about these things. Breeding can't get you down to 0 ricin or 0 quercetin. They've tried. They can lower it, but they can't get it down to 0. Now you can delete the gene, completely delete it, using CRISPR-Cas9. That's pretty good, so you can grow the crop. The problem is pollination from wild type around there, so it's actually good to put RNAi and antisense so that you have a fail-safe that if it crosses with the pollen from some other crop, from the wild type, you get rid of it. I won't go through some of the rest of the things that we're going to talk about. But we'll ask, will the necessary products be provided by industry or by the public sector? Well, industry is hardly interested in the developing world where we need to grow the new crops to make up for the deficit we're going to have. It's going to have to come from the public sector, and we have to deal with it. But in conclusion, I'd like to say that the transgenic removal of endogenous allergens, lectins, other poisons, contaminants, mycotoxins from the crops and the undomesticated species. There are a lot of crops that we could be growing, but they're under-domesticated, could enhance food safety and increase food biodiversity. For this reason, I wrote a book a few years ago called Genetic Glass Ceilings, Transgenics for Crop Biodiversity. We have to get more crops in there. We have to have safer crops for people. The day will come when something's wrong with the broccoli, please take it back and have it genetically modified. We hope that day will come. There are a lot of regulatory considerations. Some of them are problematic, and we may say that some of these meetings may contain nuts. We have to separate the science from the rhetoric. Science is not democratic, as somebody pointed out recently. The citizens should not get to vote on whether a whale is a mammal or a fish, or on the temperature at which water boils. There are facts, and facts are facts. So we can't decide democratically whether a fact is correct or not. I think that's a job left to people who understand that. So in dealing with food security, we have to use the human mind at its greatest potential. And the human mind is sort of like a parachute, best used while open. And we have to beware of the type of people who go out and burn up research projects. This is a group burning golden rice in the Philippines. Look how they're dressed. Doesn't it remind you of the people on the left? Burning food, burning research, to my mind, is very similar to burning books. You're burning knowledge, you're trying to get rid of it. We have to be careful, very careful of those. Let our credo not be support starvation, say no to GMOs. We have to use everything in our power to enhance food security. This is actually a little statue I have in my garden that I made from pieces I found. It's turning swords into plowshares. We have to use the best tools we can. Any tool we have can be used bad or used good, and for the benefit of mankind. And we have to use everything we can to ensure safe, sustainable food supply. So we have to decide whether to use biotech to help or sit around and do nothing. I think the artist said it's very concisely, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. We have to make the choice. Food security requires new genes in crops and new crops to deal with the stresses that we have on our environment. Thank you very much.